Graça for this interview for the remedies of memory. May I call you Pedro?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. You are a professor of food policy at the University of Porto in Portugal. You are a great expert of Mediterranean diet. How would you define the Mediterranean diet?
This is a good question to start because the way we define Mediterranean diet is the way that we study and that we think about it. So I would say that for me in the beginning, Mediterranean diet was a way of eating. That's why I start studying this subject as a way of eating. With the years, I realized that it was much more than a way of eating, because before you eat the product, you need to produce that. And you need to take decisions. What product do you produce? And then how do you transport? And then how do you cook it? And then how do you share it with others? And even the waste of the food is a subject nowadays of study, because we in the Mediterranean and in this area, we didn't want to waste too much. So for the pork, all the animal, we reuse parts of the animal, and is a way of preserving also the protein, that was something very necessary. So I would say that today, if I need to make an expression or a conclusion about how to define Mediterranean diet, I would say that is a way of relate with food. How we relate with food in some way. This is our Mediterranean way of seeing the food, how it is. So it's not just a way of eating, but it's a way of living with the food. That's why UNESCO define it as a cultural patrimonium and not only an healthy patrimonium, but it's much more than that. So this is my definition in this moment.
You often say that it's a diet of adaptation. What do you mean?
Well, the word adaptation is central to define the Mediterranean diet, because the Mediterranean places, although they look like a calm, a peaceful place, it was not that every day. We don't have food every day. We don't have rain every day. Sometimes people from the Mediterranean see arriving boats with some guys that want to take their money and their lives in the past and still today in different parts of the Mediterranean. So it's not a quiet and peaceful place as they told us. It's a place that we strive every day to survive. And when you are poor in terms of having lots of food, not in terms of other things, but when you are poor and you have these connections with climatic change and everything, you must adapt. So adaptation, constant adaptation to the environment, cultural, physical, nature, all this way of living was a constant adaptation process. Of course, in other parts of the world, we adapt always. But the fact that we have here a platform of knowledge that I will call it Mediterranean Sea, that was a flat platform where you can connect easily with others, made this adaptation more quickly. A quick adaptation, quick exchange of knowledge, quick exchange of plants, quick exchange of animals. All of this bring that Mediterranean diet was very biodiverse, was cultural very rich, and then because also that all of this region where knowledge and men thought about problems, made also that religion came also, because you are religious also when you have time to connect with the others. And this means that you put not only the adaptation of that, but the cultural and religious adaptation to all of that, made a very rich cultural environment. And this in some way defines also the word adaptation in Mediterranean diet, a constant adaptation and in many times happy adaptation. What for me is more interesting, because I'm a nutritionist and I come from biological science, is that the human and biological adaptation means that you eat what gives you pleasure on one way, but what makes you survive. So many of our religious texts are about food and are about telling others what they should eat. This in some way is a way of dominate the others, but at the same time is a way of telling stories about what to eat to survive. So the rules, the political rules, and I'm very interested about political rules, the political rules during many times and still today are about what you should eat, when you should eat, etc. So I would say that adaptation means also all of these things related with food.
Do you think that today we should defend the Mediterranean diet?
Well, I think this way of living, I'm not talking about, you're telling me about to defend the Mediterranean diet. If I say that Mediterranean diet is about a way of living, I would say that we should defend our way of living. Because we create during the last 8,000 years, it's not during the last century, it's during the last 8,000 years. We create a way of living that in some way we like it in some way. And when I defend the Mediterranean diet, I'm defending this way of living. And what is this way of living? What am I defending? I'm defending not only the food that was produced nearby, but I'm defending those that produce the food. I'm defending in some way the rights of those that produce the food. And that's why when I'm defending Mediterranean diet, in some way I'm taking a political decision. I'm taking a political stand about food. Because I say, if I agree that Mediterranean diet is about adaptation, this means that I recognize that others have another way of eating, and I adapt. When I adapt, I don't impose. I would say that adaptation is more or less the opposite of imposition. And I think the Mediterraneans, in some way, they try to impose, but they also receive some imposition. So in this balance, we adapt. And that's why I think when we are talking about Mediterranean diet, we are always talking about politics in some way. Not politicians, but about politics. And that's why to preserve the Mediterranean diet, I must pass to citizens the idea that when they open their mouth, they are taking a political act, because they are taking a decision about the life of other persons. If other persons can survive with what they produce, if I want to support that type of farming, because I can choose different type of foods, I can choose a food that is close to me, I can choose a food that comes far away from me, I can choose a food that my parents eat, I can choose a food that I never saw. I have the freedom nowadays in the Mediterranean area to choose different things. But at the same time, each choice multiplied by 8 billion people around the world can, I would say they have not only a political and a social impact, but a huge environmental impact. If I decide to eat everyday meat, I should have much bigger impact than many decisions about carbon emissions or other things. And it's a single decision. And nowadays, meat is not so expensive as it was in the past. So nowadays, we can make an aggression to the environment without costs. That it was something that didn't happen in the past. Imagine, in the past, when you kill a cow, you have no capacity to transport foods because you kill the animal that transports the food. You kill the animal that gives you milk every day. So it's a problem when we kill a cow. Nowadays, we are completely distanced from the production, and to eat more beef or less beef, we don't know about the impacts, because the impacts are diluted. in the chain. Maybe I must to go to Amazonia and to take down the forest, the rainforest, to produce cattle there. But I don't know anything about that. And I like that meat because it's tasty and it's cheap. But it's cheap why? It's cheap because people that are working there are not receiving their money. The land, it was land that was from nobody. It was for us. And that's why the meat is cheap. So talking and defending Mediterranean diet means involvement, political involvement, means conscience of the capacity that I can influence that. And for us, it's a huge problem because I believe that Mediterranean countries, they were ruled by dictators until many years ago. We don't have this, and I don't know what happened in Italy, other countries, but in Portugal, we have a dictatorship during 48 years, until 74, 75. So people don't realize the power they have. They still think that government are the others that take the decisions. And this empowerment about food and about what we eat, it's an empowerment that maybe it takes some decades, it takes some generations. But I think to defend, to preserve Mediterranean diet, we must accelerate this process so that people realize that they can take their decisions, especially when they eat.
Do you think that the Mediterranean diet can be attractive today?
When you say attractive, you say in what meaning, in what way?
For example, there are many fashions, many ideas concerning food today, and very often people just change their diet from one day to the other. They come back and they become something else. Maybe the Mediterranean diet is seen as an old style, not really fancy, not really sexy, not really attractive.
Yes, yes. I think this is a really very, very important question and very important decision to take about how to transform this in something that it's appealing for everyone, but to not create the idea that, I'll just give an example. I fight against this, but sometimes there is an idea that Mediterranean diet is the diet of our grandmothers. We need to help them to preserve this type of food, this type of eating. And women should be at home cooking the meals to produce. It's in some way a very machistic, man's speech. What is the place of the woman at home cooking to preserve the diet, to educate their children? So in some way is a way of looking to food if we don't be more the capacity to say no, the preservation of Mediterranean diet is a problem for men and women equally these days, because women must be out of house working. They don't have time to cook, but we are saying that you should have time to cook. And this creates like a dialogue that is a schizophrenic dialogue, because on one way you say you must preserve your traditions, you must take some time cooking and understand, and another time you must go out, you must work, you must do everything, you must take care of your children. And when we put this together, this can create an idea that is not a fashion idea, a modern idea. So I think that in the past we adapt, we still in nowadays to preserve our diet, we must adapt. We must understand what are the main barriers that made that we cannot achieve a Mediterranean diet, and what we can do to go beyond these barriers, and create an environment that people can have time sometimes to eat, to share, to produce, to this type of knowledge cannot be lost. And what we can do. At school, we start teaching a little about how to cook, men and women together, kids, boys and girls, trying to understand how to do that. Try to ask a grandmother to come 1 or 2 days and together to write down an old recipe. This is things that we can do in family, and not necessarily trying to preserve something like in the crystal and trying to preserve like very well how it was, right? Like a castle. But I agree with you that the mix, but should be, I think we should be intelligent in doing that, because if you are not, Mediterranean diet will be like we heard, could be an Atkins diet, could be a diet that arrives today and goes out yesterday. That's why governments and other institutions must look for that as a patrimonium, a real patrimonium that should be preserved like others. And this is not a characteristic of something that arrives today and goes tomorrow. This, we must have critical mass. We must discuss this with the influent groups. We must study about that. We must ask anthropologists to take a picture of what's happening. We must ask sociologists to write about that. Well, we must have a critical mass, because when you have a critical mass, things don't disappear in 2 days, like fashion diets will disappear. But maybe this is the way.
And is there a critical mass in Portugal at the moment?
Well, I would say that is a mass of concern, not yet a mass of knowledge. This is different. I think what we need more, not only in Portugal but in other countries, is a guidance. Guidance means that some people are putting the discussion in the right way. I just give an example. If the Minister of Agriculture of any country, Portugal inclusive, decides to preserve the Mediterranean diet, right, I agree. Then, if they decide to create a center for the preservation of Mediterranean diet, then they ask the people from agronomy to try to preserve that. And if they decide that the best way to preserve that is to identify olive oil that is disappearing, to promote olive oil, and that we have all our money, all our critical mass on that way. And there should be someone who say, okay, let's go on that way, it's important, but let's look at the older family that cannot make that anymore. Let's look about poor people that cannot follow the Mediterranean diet, what's happening to these poor families. Let's look at the supermarkets, why they are selling Mediterranean products more expensive than other products. Let's look at fiscal measures that we can help to support that. Let's look at the laws of the work, so that women don't pass, and men don't pass so much time at work, and they have time to lunch and to prepare real food. Let's look at schools, what are they offering to kids? Are they Mediterranean products and way of cooking, or is just a company that arrives there and sell everything? Let's look at hospitals, what are they providing to their people? Let's look in the global way and let's talk about that. This type of guidance, so that we have a way of looking to that and to aggregate that, this type of critical knowledge, this is more difficult. Because one of our problems, our societies, that we are very individualistic. And Mediterranean, the South is really very individualistic. Very difficult to create communities of interests and to produce things. So if we fight this type of individualistic things, we have very clever people, we have very good people thinking about that, but most of the time they are not connected each other. I think the capacity to connect people with different thoughts, but at the same time with an idea of preservation, and that we can create some consensus. It is very difficult sometimes to achieve, because we have many genius, too many genius in our society, and we must have less genius and more people that arrive to consensus. If we create that, I think we are in the good way, in somehow. But the South has created many genius, but a lone genius. And I think to preserve the Mediterranean diet, we need more concentrated and more dynamic groups, but more consensus about that.
You very often say that people who want to defend the Mediterranean diet sometimes don't have clear ideas, while on the other side, who want to make business with food, they have really clear ideas.
Yeah.
Don't you think that also our humanities, our human sciences are not really ready to engage a fight with economy, with the other forces?
Okay. This is a very for me very important question, in a way that what characterizes humanities in some way is that they can have a reasoning, thinking about things that are a little away from money. And this is very important for me because I don't know if a more pure approach, but it's sometimes very poor approach that I like it. I like people thinking just by thinking and to think about that. But I agree with you that on the other side, there are people that are thinking in money all the time. So how can we, think the two ways and discuss a little? Well, I think the main point in this discussion, and I work many times with people from humanities, is that it is not so true that these people are away from the real world, because more and more we have good examples. I think we create an idea that people from humanities usually they are outside of this world. But it's not so true. We have very good examples with tourism, with combining things that we can approach. The most difficult for me here is the financing, and is the fact that to do all of these things, to put people together, that we have some budget. And usually we don't have the capacity, and I'm not saying about humanities, other areas, we don't have the capacity to have money to do this type of things. And this is the way where I think the public service and the states should support this type of things. Okay, because we use lots of money in Portugal, I don't know what happened in other countries, to support banks, to support people to go down, and there are things that we should see as issues that deserve some money. If I have a commission to preserve the Mediterranean diet or a group to preserve the Mediterranean, I have one of two in Portugal and one of two in Spain. These groups, are they belonging to where? Do they have good ideas about the questions? Are they credible and do they have different points of view? Can a government have some minimal capacity of understand what they are doing, to have define what you want to achieve? If this is okay, I give you some money. Then, after 3 years, you give me a report to do that. We have a foundation to give money to scientific projects that in Spain, in Italy, that distributes thousands of euros every year to support research. So I think part of this money can be to one of two centers to preserve things that should be preserved. One of them for me is Mediterranean diet. So, when we have an annual budget and we know that we receive the money, you can say, with that money, what we're gonna do? We will do things that companies never will do. For example, we go to the mountain, we're gonna interview old people about what they do. This is something that a company will never do that. So we need money to preserve public things, public forests, animals, things that don't have voice by their own. I think Mediterranean diet, we don't have voice by our own. It's a cultural construct. So I think people that are interested in preserve, in this case, environmental things, cultural things, must also give some money for that. In our case, in Portugal, we receive a few money to preserve that. And now we are expecting to relate with food companies so that they give some money to do that. But for me, this is a conflict of interests that cannot be together. But people that realize, or they are trying to impose this model, think that they discover the Holy Grail, because they discover that the companies will finish that and everything. No, people usually have their own interests. Even we say that they are separate, usually they are together. I'm not against, but it should be very transparency and very clear objectives, and we can make a good accountability what we are doing. But I think that public state that we spend so much money in so many things, there should be public money to this type of preservation.
I totally agree with you, and by the way, the Granaries of Memory is open source, is translated, and is made for free. We have no financiers. It's just a network of universities, and we do volunteer in order to make the memory of the word available to all people. That's why I want to end this very interesting interview asking you something a bit more personal. Do you come from Porto or from other parts of Portugal?
I was born in Faro, that is a city in the south of Portugal. I was born in the hospital, in the first floor, and from that window I can see the sea. So it's more southern, and from the hospital we can see maybe in the other part is Morocco or Africa. So it's Algarve and Gibraltar a little more, but maybe the Sahara or Mauritania or Morocco we can see from the other side. Of course I cannot see because the earth is round, but anyway, so I was born in the south. And I was born in the 60s in the south of Portugal, where still meat was not so common. And I remember that in some small village we just have meat for weekends, or not so common. And it was not so many years ago. Even butter was not so available, and usually because of hot weather, the butter was not very tasty all the time. So it's not so much time ago. And then I went to the north because the Faculty of Nutrition on that time, the only one state university that teach and form nutritionists in Portugal. We have a Faculty of Nutrition by their own. It's completely separate from other faculties. So usually nutrition and medicine are together. In Porto, we separate that and we create our own faculty. So we have a Faculty of Nutrition and I go there to study. And then I married there and I live there. But in Porto, we have one thing that for me is very important. We have critical mass. And I think that I like the countryside, but I think cities sometimes have very good things that we have human beings together. And when human beings are together and they have a good thought about something, we can join our efforts to achieve something. That's what I like cities, sometimes very crowded cities, where we can discuss and we can create some links to defend something. And Porto we have there, and I like to be there because of that.
Do you cook?
Yes, I cook. I usually make a deal with my wife. Because she's much better cooker than I. So I try to cook, not to lose some type of capacities, but most of the time I get the kitchen like very well, and she cooks.
So you make an effort.
I make an effort to balance these skills with other things to help. Yes.
You have some kids.
Yes, 2 kids.
Do they cook?
Yes. They cook, and more interesting than that is that, and I even don't know if I can film that, but I can say, don't worry, is that I never try to transmit how to cook or the pleasure of cooking. And I think this is very important about education. Sometimes you don't need to impose things. They saw me many times cooking. They saw their mother cooking. They realized we like to cook. And when this happens, when they have now 18, 20, one of them is 25 now, 24 and the other 23, they are cooking at their homes. Because in their minds, they thought that this is the normal way of doing. But I never imposed. I should maybe teach something, but no. They were there, they were seeing, and I think with the Mediterranean diet, with food education, more important than to impose what to eat is parents eat well. When a parent eats well, the kid will eat well always. But when the parents don't like fish and impose fish, that's a problem. When parents say don't smoke and they are smoking, that's a problem. When parents are eating cakes and say you don't eat because you are young, you should not eat, we have a problem. And I think this is, for me, the example is the most important thing for everything. And for Mediterranean diet, I think the way that we will teach is that when you arrive to a place, for example, in my faculty, we have meetings. And during the meetings, more and more, and even in the Ministry of Health, because I also work in the Ministry of Health, I run the National Program of Nutrition. When we have our meetings, when we put good food there, we don't need to talk about healthy eating. But many times in ministries, and even Ministry of Health, we have a meeting, and what we have there, coffee and cakes. Does not match. I just give an example. This is just a story. Maybe we are outside of time, but we made a rule in the Portuguese National Health Service so that all the bars and restaurants inside the hospitals, they could not sell many things. They could not sell sodas, they could not sell cakes, they do not sell a lot of things. We have almost a rebellion. You know from who? In many cases, from medical doctors. What is completely strange, right? They say, I'm working and I need to eat something sweet because I have a very hard work. And I say, but we are at 5 o'clock saying to that man that is a diabetic, don't eat cakes. And then you leave your place and you go to have cakes in front of him. What is the type of example are you saying? So this is a good discussion, but I think the example is also the way to preserve Mediterranean diet.
You also told me that you don't agree with our idea of working time.
Yes.
The Northern European model doesn't help to cook.
Yes, yes. I think this is one of the most hidden questions about preserving Mediterranean diet, because we always saying that Mediterranean diet is a way of living. But the way of living means that you divide your day to have time to do your things, right? And we understand, or we agree, that having time to eat with friends, with family, and have some conviviality is one of the main important things of Mediterranean diet. But when our governments say that you must work at 8 to leave at 4 so that you can go early, I never saw a syndicate fighting to have time to eat. Well, maybe they are doing that. I'm maybe not to be correct to them, but at the news, or I always see about fighting for more money, fighting for periods of rest at the weekends, things like that. But I never saw a fight for having, for example, water in canteens, proper food in canteens, time to eat. People want to compress their working day because most of people don't like what they do. Maybe it's the only way. So they want to compress their day of work so that they run home. Many times they don't run home because they spend all the time in lines in the traffic, okay? To spend 2 hours in traffic. But never someone say, no, let's cut this in the middle to have 1 hour to have a lunch with friends and family, very quiet, or go home to have a proper lunch. And for me, this, I would say it's not the food security, social security, they don't have respect by our hours of having a dinner. And most, I would not say most important at that, but for me very, very problematic question is about the type of work that our day we have. And especially with the work that we do where there are now no hours. I don't know the percentage of workers we have in Europe, but more and more we don't have a work from 8 to 5, even from some days we work at night shifts, and then we have day shifts. And when we compare the type of eating of people with these shifts, and we compare to a person that don't have shifts, we uneasily see that people with this type of confused time to work, they are not healthy. And this is a huge problem in Europe. We have thousands of people nowadays with this dysregulated timetable to work. And when we look for them, they are more obese, more diabetic, with lots of problems. They go to a machine, to work in the machine in the middle of the night. Then on the other day, they work by day. Then they go for night. And this is completely dysregulated. And this is a huge problem. I don't know the percentage, but a huge percentage of Portuguese workers nowadays work with this regime. And this is a problem, even for the preservation of Mediterranean diet, because machines, they just have cakes and chocolates and sodas, nothing more.
You don't find bread and olive oil, for example?
Never, and fruits. We don't, and a huge problem associated, for me, associated with these machines, is that they need the preservation time.
Yes.
So, and how do you preserve food? With salt and sugar. That's why sometimes I was fighting with the industry, because I also make some this type of, in the ministry we have this frequently talks with the industry. And once I was saying, okay, you can produce that without salt. This is too salty. We can produce this with less salt. And what they say, no, we need the salt, because the salt is to preserve food because of bacteria, and this is a question of food security. Then I go to the producer and they ask him, do you need salt to produce ham, for example, prosciutto? Do you need so much salt? And they said, no, we don't need the salt. And I said, why? But they told me, no, we need the salt, because when we have salt, because it's cooked. So when the ham is cooked, they kill the bacteria, so they don't need salt. And I say, why do you put salt? And he say, if I put 1 gram of salt here, the preservation time in the shelves of supermarket, it's 2 weeks. When I put 2 grams, it's 4 weeks. So I sell in, how we say, in the place where you go to the car, and I need to the bomb station, the gasoline stations, I need the sandwich there. For 2 weeks, I don't have people to remove the sandwich. And I must have very low prices sandwich. So I put salt, and they stay there for 3 days, 3 weeks, whatever you want. So the salt and sugar are very important for preservation of time. And when we have more people going to machines and to test places, everything you explain.
So salt makes money.
Salt makes money, and not only makes more preserved time, but also in the case of ham, with salt, the protein absorbs more water. So you sell water by the price of meat protein. It's very good business.
They are very clever.
No, okay, they are doing that every day. They are just thinking about that every day.
What's your traditional favorite food?
Plates with fish. Mediterranean is not a single place. I would say that there are Mediterranean diets. The case of Portugal, we are the most Atlantic Mediterranean country, because part of our coast, all of our coast is ocean, Atlantic Ocean. Although the climatic is Mediterranean, all our coast is Atlantic. And when we have Atlantic, we have lower temperatures, and we have, for me, more tasty fish. And we have very good fish in Portugal, so I'm very fan of fish, although there is a problem with fishing, as you know.
Can you tell me the names in Portuguese of these kinds of fishes you like?
Yes. I cannot translate, so I will say in Portuguese.
Yes, of course.
I like a kind, it's very similar to sardinha, but is cavala. Cavala is also a small fish, but very tasty. It hasn't a commercial value because you throw away that, but nowadays we are eating more and more. So I like fish that are close to us. For example, one of the most, I would say, known fish in Portugal is cod, bacalhau. But the tradition of cod is a tradition of the North Banks. We catch them very, very far from our coast. So it's not an environmental issue, but I prefer small fish. Small fish have very good things. First, you can eat, well, not small baby fish, small fish because they are small. But small fish, they are, one of their more interesting issue is that you can eat all the fish. So you can eat calcium that is on the bones of the fish. And it's very interesting. Another interesting thing of small fish, you can fry it. I'm a nutritionist, but when you fry it in the good way, you have a nice product because the oil doesn't enter in the fish, it comes just that, and it cooked inside without oil. The question is to have a good temperature of oil. If you put low temperature, the oil goes inside the product. If you put 200 degrees in the oil, it creates like a impermeable layer, then the oil doesn't go inside. So, but I like cavalla, sardinha. I also like octopus, polvo. That's for me, when it's very well done in the north of Portugal and Spain, Galicia. We have pulpo à galega. It's a very good way of producing polvo. That is also very tasty. But it's my favorites, I can say.
Does wine belong to your diet?
That's why?
Does drinking wine belong to your diet?
Yes, I'm not a daily drinker. I usually drink more at the weekends. I start drinking more beer. That is not a Mediterranean thing in the last years. But even though I like wine and special red wine, we have very good red wines in Portugal. It's interesting because we are the most biodiverse grapes in the world. We have thousands of different grapes. But the question also is another question related to Mediterranean diet. Very small producers. And when we have very small producers, they don't have capacity to survive in this world where everything is Chardonnay and Syria, and we have just 3 or 4 things that people are looking. And then if I told you about Ovelha Negra or Toriga Nacional, that are Portuguese special grape that made a very good wine, you don't know them because they have no capacity to export. But you must go to Portugal to taste it. That's a little about this thing that we cannot have everything around the world. Maybe Mediterranean diet must be tasted in the place. In the place. This.
It's always very different.
Yes, complete.
It's much more interesting.
Yes.
Culture is really there.
Yes. Yeah.
The last question I would like to ask you is, and I ask you to answer in Portuguese. The question is there a plate, a dish of memory for you? Something that belongs to when you were young, to a special person who made it for you. So is there a memory dish?
Okay. I will explain in Portuguese the name of the plate.
But you can also
answer. But I can just in English explain a little.
Yes, of course.
It's a plate that is a very rare plate, and we cannot find that usually in almost anywhere. But mothers usually, or fathers, or old people used to do. In Portuguese, the name is xerém. It's a very strange name. I think it should be Arab. It's made with a product that was not common in the south, that is corn. It's like polenta, but is cooked in the Portuguese way. So, xerém com conquilhas. Xerém é milho, corn. Milho, e o milho é produzido com inclusão, inclusão de conquilhas, amêijoas ou berbigão. These are, I don't know the translation, but are products that we see in the sea. You catch in the sea, in the sand, shells. This plate is a plate of the survival of Mediterranean people because it combina o milho, onde havia água, when there is water you have rice, but on the same time combines with these mussels and these products that are only in the sand. You cannot produce that. You go when the water is down, you go there, you catch them. And this is very, very, very interesting when we go to Portuguese beach. I don't know if other parts of Europe, maybe it happens. You see people, old people, with their hands or with their feet like scratching in the sand, trying to catch something. I think this is in our genes, in our memory, when we, in Mediterranean diets, to survive, they need to have one part is the building of the Mediterranean diets, cereals, things like that. And the other part is the survival part. You're trying to find out food where they are. You try to kill a bird, you try to go to land, this is the survival kit. I usually call the survival kit. It's something that is not prepared. It can happen or cannot happen. So if you go to the sea, you try to scratch and get like this, and then you make with other products like rice or corn, you can make a product that is like an happening, because no one expects that one day, it's completely unexpected. The other products, you go to the market, you know every day that you'll be, for that, there is nothing, today you have, so it's like an unexpected, it's like a surprise, it's like a feast. And I think the Mediterranean diet is also the unexpected. And some days you arrive home and say, I have this, and the poor people have a nice feast because they have a product that only rich people can eat as we told this one, in France, in a very good cuisine, and then you have a very rich product. So this is one of my memory, that it's going to the family in the land and in the sea, and try to find what we catch and then make a very good product at the end of the day.
So it's a gift from nature.
Yes, and from lucky too. So it's about nature, God, and lucky, everything together to make a good moment.
Thank you, Pedro.
Okay, thank you very much.